Welcome, friends, and heartfelt thanks to everyone who chose to spend part of their time with us. Your presence and support mean a lot. Every view, comment, and like helps us continue and bring you stronger, better stories. If you enjoy the story, don't forget to subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share your thoughts in the comments. Which moment scared you the most or caught your attention? We wish you an enjoyable viewing full of suspense. The world did not end with an explosion. It ended with a weary geological exhale. Beneath Yellowstone, the sleeping monster of the nation had finally begun to move. It did not erupt in the dramatic, cinematic way everyone had always imagined. It simply opened. Fissures stretching for miles tore through the ground, spewing a dense, endless cloud of ash that smothered the sun and wrapped the world in a colorless shroud. The sky became slate. The air carried a constant taste of sulfur and powdered stone. Our last, staggering miles toward Black Hollow Lodge felt like crawling through purgatory. The old iron grave, Mordren's rusted pride and joy, groaned the whole way, its tires grinding through ash with the texture of wet cement mixed with crushed glass. On the mountain pass, it was almost a foot deep, an even, suffocating blanket laid over everything. The bare arms of the pine trees, bent beneath their gray burden, leaned over the road like mourners at the funeral of the world. A deep, unnatural silence pressed against the cab of the truck. Only the strained whine of the engine and the steady squeal of the wipers broke it, smearing gritty ash across the windshield again and again. Inside, the five of us were jammed together, one miserable little group of survivors. Mordren, the resort's old mechanic, held the wheel in his twisted hands, his knuckles tight, his face fixed in grim concentration. Vark sat beside him, a finance guy from Boston wearing a $1,000 ski jacket that had turned the same dead gray as everything else. He stared through the window with his jaw clenched so hard I thought his teeth might split. In the back, I was wedged between Celine and Morwen. Celine, the medical student, was carefully cleaning a pair of glasses that would be filthy again within 5 minutes. A small gesture of control in a world that had lost all order. Morwen, the quiet history grad student, only watched the dead landscape drift past, her expression distant and hollow. And then there was me, Davin, former park ranger. I was supposed to be the expert out here, the one who understood this land. But it was not land anymore. It was a tomb. You see it? Mordren rasped, his voice rough from the poisoned air. Through the swirling ash, a shape slowly formed. Black Hollow Lodge. It was more than a building. It was a fortress of widow pine logs and river stone. A monument from a time when people came into these mountains for pleasure. Its steep roofs had been built to shed heavy snow, but now they sagged beneath the weight of an endless winter made of ash. It looked like a beached ark on a dead sea. To us, it was the promised land. Mordren coaxed the truck up the last incline and into the main parking lot, where half-buried luxury SUVs rested like sleeping whales. The instant he shut off the engine, the silence came crashing back, heavier than before. For a moment, none of us moved. Simply arriving felt enormous. "All right," I said, my voice breaking through the stillness. "Let's not waste time admiring the view." I looked at Mordren. "You and I check the main entrance. Vark, stay with Celine and Morwen. Keep your eyes open." Vark glanced at me, his face caught somewhere between fear and resentment. "Looking for what? The welcome committee?" "Just do it," I said. I had no strength left for an argument. The ash crunched beneath my boots with a sickening sound, like stepping on tiny bones. The cold hit at once. It was damp and invasive, a chill that had nothing to do with snow and everything to do with the total absence of sunlight. We found the main doors. Massive slabs of carved wood and iron. Unlocked. They opened on a breath of stale, trapped air. The grand lobby waited beyond them, a cavern filled with shadow. A 3-story stone fireplace filled one wall, its hearth black and cold. Antler chandeliers, filmed with fine dust, hung from the vaulted ceiling like ancient skeletons. Moonlight, or whatever counted as moonlight in this new twilight, slipped weakly through the tall plate glass windows and caught the drifting dust in the dark. It was unsettling, but it was solid. It was shelter. "Home sweet home," Mordren muttered, drawing a heavy-duty flashlight from his belt. We spent the next hour clearing the ground floor. The lodge was empty. When the evacuation had happened, it seemed to have been orderly. There were no signs of panic. only evidence of a fast departure. Forgotten luxury lingered everywhere. Velvet chairs in the lounge, polished tables in the enormous dining hall, a grand piano on a raised dais, its lid shut. The kitchen was the real prize. It was a stainless steel maze, and behind it stood a walk-in pantry. My heart struck hard against my ribs when I saw the shelves. Canned food. Industrial containers of beans, peaches, corn, and tuna. Bags of rice and pasta thicker than my arm. Enough to keep us alive for months, if we rationed it carefully. Well, I'll be damned, Vark said. For one brief moment, his cynicism disappeared as he stared at the stockpile. For the first time in days, the tight knot of hunger in my stomach loosened. While Vark and the women began taking inventory, I followed Mordrin down into the basement. It was a maze of concrete and pipes, thick with the smell of damp earth and machine oil. In a caged-off room, we found it, a diesel generator the size of a small car. "She's a beast," Mordrin said, dragging one hand fondly over the engine block. "Cummins. Best there is." He looked it over. "Fuel tanks ought to be out back by the maintenance shed." Then he tapped a gauge. "Looks like she's still got a little in the service tank. Maybe enough to get her humming." He started working, each movement steady, spare, and certain. This was where he belonged, pulling life back into dead machines. I left him there and went upstairs. Night came down. Not that it changed much in the permanent gloom outside, but inside, it brought a deeper cold. We gathered wood by breaking apart the ornate chairs and tables in the lobby with a fire axe I had found in a service closet. Before long, a real fire was roaring inside the huge stone hearth. A defiant, crackling flare of orange against the crushing gray. The firelight forced the shadows back, making the vast room feel smaller. Safer. We gathered close around it, eating cold beans straight from the cans, the heat of the flames on our faces like a desperate kind of luxury. "I was in Boston," Vark said, staring into the fire. "At my desk. We saw the alerts come in, but nobody thought it would turn into this." He swallowed. "The sky just went black in the middle of the afternoon. Then the ash started. Then the panic. I got in my car and drove west." He shook his head. "Don't know why. Just away from the cities." Celine spoke after him, her voice low. "I was on a clinical rotation. The hospital was chaos. At first, the ash was like fine dust. The asthma patients came in first. Then everyone else." She looked down. Within hours, it overwhelmed everything. I left with a group heading for higher ground. We got separated. Morwen only shook her head and drew her knees tight against her chest. "I was already here," she said, "in a small cabin a few miles away, researching local folklore for my dissertation. I just stayed inside until the food was gone." Her voice thinned. "Then I started walking. They all turned to me. I was on duty," I said. The memory tasted like acid. Coordinating evacuations near the park's east entrance. We were trying to move people through Bone Maw before the ash got too deep. I stopped for a second. We didn't make it. The road just vanished. Some of us turned back. The rest. My voice died. Images of stranded cars and frantic faces flashed behind my eyes. The guilt sat on me like a physical weight. Then, without warning, the fluorescent lights overhead flickered. They sputtered. Then they hummed alive, spilling a sterile, buzzing glow across the room. Every one of us looked up, startled. A moment later, Mordrin came out of the stairwell, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. "Let there be light," he said. A rare, thin smile crossed his face. A rough cheer rose from our little group. It was not much, a tiny puncture of light in a darkness without end. But it belonged to us. There in the enormous, empty lodge, with fire warming our backs and electricity trembling through the walls, something fragile and dangerous began to grow inside my chest. Hope. We were safe. We had food. We had shelter. We had warmth. We were going to survive. The first few days passed in a blur of labor, a frantic but focused effort to turn the lodge from a temporary refuge into a home we could defend. Routine became our shield against the crushing truth of the world outside. We boarded the ground floor windows with planks pried from the ski rental shop, leaving only small peepholes we could defend. We organized the pantry. Vark attacked that job with the obsessive energy of an accountant, making supply spreadsheets on the backs of old menus. Celine turned one of the offices into a small infirmary, arranging her medical kit neatly across a desk. Inside the walls of Black Hollow Lodge, we were building a tiny new civilization. Mordrin was the center of all of it. He got the generator running for 3 hours each evening, giving us a precious window of power and light. We used it to cook on the kitchen's electric stove and to listen to the shortwave radio's static hiss, waiting for a voice that never came. He was a magician with machinery. His quiet competence steadied all of us. There were 6 of us then. The 6th was a young woman named Naira. She had been traveling alone when the first ashfall caught her out on a hike. We found her on the road the day before we reached the lodge, dazed and half frozen. She was quiet, almost spectral, with eyes that seemed locked forever in shock. She hardly spoke. Most of the time, she only drew in a small notebook she kept with her at all times. She ate with us, worked beside us, but she stayed separate, sealed inside her own private trauma. On the morning of the 5th day, she never came down for the daily ration handout. "Has anyone seen Naira?" I asked, looking over the small group gathered in the dining hall. Blank stares. A knot of unease tightened low in my stomach. "She's probably sleeping in," Vark said with a shrug. "Some of us aren't exactly morning people." "I'll check her room," Celine said. Concern creased her forehead. She returned 5 minutes later, pale-faced. "Her bed hasn't been slept in. Her pack is still there, but her jacket and boots are gone." She paused. "And her notebook?" A silent dread settled across the room. "All right," I said, my voice coming out harder than I meant it to. "Vark, you're with me." We searched the building first. Then we checked the immediate perimeter. "Outside." Vark's voice sharpened in disbelief. "In that? What's the point?" "The point," I said, holding his stare, "is that we don't leave people behind. Not now. Not ever." We searched the lodge from top to bottom, our flashlights cutting pale beams through rooms thick with dust and silence. Nothing. The place was enormous, a maze of guest wings, conference rooms, and service halls. But it was empty. With every vacant room we cleared, the cold dread in my gut grew heavier. At last, there was nowhere left to search except outside. We bundled ourselves up, pulled masks over our faces to keep out the worst of the ash, and stepped through a service door. The cold struck like a physical blow. The ash was falling harder that day, a soft curtain that swallowed sound and cut visibility to less than 50 feet. It felt like standing inside a snow globe filled with gray dust. We began a circular search pattern, moving outward from the main building. Vark found her. He had gone around the corner toward the west wing, where the main guest lounge sat behind its floor-to-ceiling panoramic windows. I heard him make a strangled, guttural sound and ran to him. Naira lay in the ash only a few feet from the building. One of the enormous panes of glass had been shattered, leaving a wide black wound in the wall of the lodge. She was on her back. Her arms were thrown wide. Her open eyes stared up at the slate-gray sky. Her bright red ski jacket cut through the colorless world like a violent slash of color. "God. Oh God," Vark stammered, stepping backward. I moved toward her carefully. My ranger training took over, forcing the horror down. The first thing I saw was the absence of tracks. The fresh ash lay smooth, almost untouched, except for one set of footprints. Naira's. They came from a side door we had missed and stopped exactly where her body lay. There were no other marks. No signs of a struggle. No animal prints. Nothing. It looked as though she had walked out here, stood still for a moment, and simply died. "It must have been a grizzly," Vark said. His voice shook, but he clung to the idea. "Woke up from hibernation, starving. It broke the window. She ran out, and it got her." I shook my head and knelt beside the body, careful not to disturb the scene. "No, Vark. Look." I pointed at the ash. "A grizzly would leave prints the size of dinner plates. There's nothing. And the ground bear attacks are chaos. The ash would be torn up everywhere." I looked more closely at Naira. Her body was wrong. She had not been mauled. She had not been eaten. Her jacket had been ripped open, and across her torso were 3 deep, parallel cuts. They were clean, exact, as if surgical scalpels had made them. There was far less blood than there should have been, only dark stains frozen into the fabric. We carried her back inside wrapped in a heavy blanket. The mood inside the lodge collapsed from fragile hope into raw terror. Celine performed the examination in the makeshift infirmary, her face set in professional distance, though it could not hide the horror in her eyes. Vark, Morwen, and I waited in the hallway. After 20 long, silent minutes, she came out, peeling off her latex gloves. "It wasn't a bear," she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Vark, you were right to think of an animal. But this isn't like any animal I've ever read about." "What do you mean?" I asked. "The wounds," Celine said, wrapping her arms around herself. "They're incredibly deep. And precise." She looked shaken. "They cut through muscle and bone. The force it would take is enormous, but the edges are clean. Not torn, the way they would be from teeth or claws." She drew a thin breath. "And the spacing. They're perfectly parallel, about 4 inches apart. Whatever did this, it wasn't thrashing. It wasn't frenzied." Her voice dropped. It felt methodical. She swallowed hard. "There's something else. I can't be certain without a proper lab, but the tissue around the wounds." She stopped for a moment. "It looks almost desiccated, like something didn't just cut her, like it drained the life, the warmth, straight out of her." A deep, primal cold settled over the room, and it had nothing to do with the temperature. We all looked toward the broken window, now hurriedly boarded over from the inside with plywood. Something had come for us. It had shattered reinforced glass, killed one of our own with surgical precision, and disappeared without a single trace into the silent gray world. Vark's idea of a starving bear had been terrifying, but a bear was known, a monster we could understand. This was something else entirely. An unknown predator was hunting through the ash, and we were trapped inside its territory. Our fortress suddenly felt like a cage. The night after we buried Naira in a shallow grave cut into the ash-covered earth, the lodge changed. It was not a sanctuary anymore. The shadows along the long corridors seemed darker. The silence between the generator cycles felt deeper and far more threatening. Every creak in the old building's timbers, every breath of wind against the boarded windows, became a reason for heart-stopping suspicion. We had been 6. Now we were 5. That simple calculation lingered in the air like the cold. Fear became something real. A presence. A 6th member of our group. Vark was hit hardest, though he tried to bury it behind angry practicality. He paced the main hall constantly, checking and rechecking the barricades we had built. He and I slipped into a rhythm of clipped, bitter arguments. He wanted stronger fortifications, more aggressive patrols inside the lodge. He treated the danger like something purely physical, something that could be stopped with enough lumber and nails. A grizzly could still get through that, he would snap, pointing at the rough patch of planks over the shattered lounge window. "We need to brace it from the inside with furniture." "A grizzly would have left tracks, Vark," I would answer, my patience wearing thin. "This is something else. We need to think, not just build walls." "Oh, right. The something else theory." His mouth twisted. "What's your expert ranger analysis on that, Davin? A ghost bear?" He stepped closer. "We're dealing with a hungry animal, and your nature boy mysticism is going to get us all killed." The tension seeped into our fragile little community like poison. Celine tried to stand between us, appealing to reason. Mordrin simply kept working. His silence felt like a heavy judgment on all of us. Only Morwen seemed to be sinking deeper into herself, her watchfulness sharpening into something newly unsettling. The sounds began on the second night. I had first watch, sitting in a worn leather armchair near the fire with a heavy tire iron laid across my lap. The generator was off. The only light came from the orange flicker of the flames. The lodge felt like a tomb. Then I heard it, a faint, dry scratching. It seemed to come from the far side of the great hall, near the main staircase. I froze and listened. It came again, a slow, deliberate scrape. 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 It sounded like a large branch dragging along the outside wall. But there was no wind that night. Earlier, when I had checked the perimeter, the ash had fallen straight down through the beam of my flashlight. I stood and crossed the thick carpet without making a sound. The noise was coming from the wall. From inside the wall. I pressed my ear to the cold wooden paneling. It was louder there. A heavy dragging shuffle moved from within the ventilation system. It sounded like something huge, something far too large for the ducts, forcing itself through the tight metal passages. It was not the skittering of a rat, not a raccoon. It was a dense, chitinous slither, like a snake that had swallowed a deer, its scales rasping against galvanized steel. The The sound climbed slowly toward the second floor. Then it faded. I stood there for a long time, the skin at the back of my neck prickling, my heart beating like a cold hammer in my chest. The next night, Morwen saw it. She had not been able to sleep. Her mind kept dragging her back to the horror of Naira's death. She was curled in a window seat on the second floor, inside a small library that looked out over the eastern slope. We had left the boards off that window. It was 20 feet above the ground and faced a sheer drop, so it had seemed impossible to reach. She had been staring out at the endless, silent fall of ash. The landscape was nothing but shapes of gray upon gray beneath the permanent twilight. She told us the next morning. Her voice was small and shaking. Her eyes were wide with a fear beyond anything we had felt so far. "I was just watching," she whispered, twisting a loose thread on her sweater. "The way it falls, it's hypnotic." She swallowed. "Then I saw something move down by the tree line." We all leaned closer, listening. Even Vark stayed quiet. "It was tall," she continued, fighting to find the words. "So tall and thin it almost looked like one of the dead trees." Her voice trembled. But it was moving. She stared at the table. It didn't walk like a person, or like an animal. It was jerky. It moved with this awful, broken grace, like a puppet hanging from tangled strings. She drew a shallow breath. 1 second it was still. The next, it lurched 10 feet forward in the blink of an eye. "Morwen," Celine began gently. "It was probably just the light. The ash can play tricks." "No," Morwen said. This time her voice carried a desperate strength. "It stopped at the edge of the woods. It just stood there. Then it turned its head." Her hands tightened in her lap. "It turned and looked straight at the lodge. Straight at my window." Her breath caught. It didn't have a normal shape. Its arms were too long. And its legs, when it moved. She faltered. It was like they had too many joints. Like a spider's. She covered her face with both hands. It stood there for a full minute, watching. Then it was gone. It didn't walk away. It just folded itself into the shadows and disappeared. A thick silence settled over the dining hall. I looked around the table. Celine seemed worried, though still skeptical. Mordrin's face was unreadable stone. Vark scoffed, shattering the spell. "Oh, for crying out loud," he said, throwing up his hands. "Now we're seeing monsters in the trees?" He shook his head. "Lack of sleep, stress, malnutrition. That causes hallucinations. We're all on edge." His voice hardened. "Naira was killed by a starving animal, and now we're letting our imaginations run wild." Then he turned on me. "And you? You're supposed to be the one keeping us grounded. You were a park ranger. You should know better than anyone what desperation does to animals." He pointed at me. "You should have seen this coming. You should have had us better prepared, instead of encouraging this ghost story." "This isn't about what I should have done, Vark." I snapped back, my own fear turning into anger. "This is about what's happening now." Morwen saw something. "She saw a branch moving in the wind," he shouted, his face flushed red. "We need to focus on real threats, not fairy tales." The argument kept burning, ugly and useless, fed by the terror we all shared. But while Vark raged, I watched Morwen. She was not hysterical. She was describing what she had seen with the precise, careful attention of a scholar. And somewhere deep in my gut, in the part of me sharpened by years spent reading the quiet signs of the wilderness, I knew she was telling the truth. The scratching inside the walls, the impossible wounds on Naira, the thing moving among the trees. They were fragments of a pattern I could not understand. Vark could keep calling it a grizzly. Morwen could call it a monster. Celine could hunt for a scientific explanation. But whatever it was outside, and it was watching us. The walls we had built no longer felt like they were keeping the cold out. They felt like they were keeping us in. The days that followed were heavy with a sticky, silent paranoia. Vark's loud disbelief did almost nothing to calm anyone. If anything, it made the fear worse, forcing the rest of us to swallow it down. We moved through the vast lodge in pairs, with no one willing to enter the long, shadowed corridors alone. The scratching in the vents became a nightly event. A slow, predatory exploration of our refuge. Sometimes it passed directly above the rooms where we slept, a dry, rasping weight dragging itself through the metal ducts. We would lie awake on our makeshift beds, staring into the dark, listening to the monster inside the machine. Morwen withdrew even further. She spent most of her time in the small library on the second floor, the same room where she had seen the creature. It was as if she was drawn back there, compelled to search for an answer in the one place that had always given her comfort. Books. The library was a time capsule from a vanished world. Shelves of best-selling thrillers and celebrity biographies stood beside glossy coffee table books about skiing and Montana's natural beauty. A monument to leisure. A bitter joke in the reality we now lived in. I found her there one afternoon. A thick leather-bound book lay open on the table before her, its yellowed pages lit by the narrow beam of her flashlight. She was so absorbed that she did not hear me come in. The library air was cold. It sat too far from the main hall to catch much heat from the fire. "Finding anything interesting?" I asked quietly, trying not to startle her. She jolted, her head snapping up. Her eyes were wide, but not with fear. They burned with a feverish kind of intellectual excitement. "Davin, I think I found something," she said, breathless. She pointed to the book. It was old. The title on the spine had been stamped in faded gold leaf. Voices of the Mountain, the folklore of the hollow ash. "Most of these books are tourist garbage," she said. "But this one is different. It's a collection of oral histories compiled by an anthropologist from the Black Veil University in the 1920s. She looked down at the pages. He lived with a local tribe and recorded their stories. She turned the book so I could see it. It was open to a chapter titled The Old Spirits of the High Peaks. There were no drawings, no illustrations, only dense blocks of text, transcriptions of stories told by tribal elders. Moen traced one passage with her finger. "I was searching for anything," she said, "any local legend about strange creatures in these mountains. And I found this." She swallowed. "They told the anthropologist about a spirit they feared more than any other. They called it Zul." She struggled with the word, shaping it into a deep guttural sound from the back of her throat. "It roughly means the ancient hunger, or the hunger before light." A chill moved down my spine, and it had nothing to do with the cold in the room. I leaned closer, reading over her shoulder as she held the flashlight on the text. "The old elder speaks. It is not a flesh creature like the great bear or the mountain cat. It is hunger given form. It sleeps in the warm heart of the mountain, where the earth is deep and the living rock is full of heat. The old one said it was born in the age before the sun first warmed the world, when everything was cold and dark and ash. It is from that age. It belongs to the gray." "Keep going," I whispered. My mouth had gone dry. Moen's finger slid farther down the page. "It will wake when the sun dies again and the air turns to stone. When the sky becomes a shroud and the world forgets the warmth of day. It does not hunt meat to satisfy a belly. Its hunger is for warmth, for the heat inside a living body, for the fire of fear inside a human heart. It pulls the heat from you, leaving only cold, empty flesh. The old ones left offerings of fire in the high caves during the longest, blackest winters. Not for heat, to soothe its sleep." My mind went straight to Celine's words about Naira's body. Desiccated, as if something had drained the life from her. The warmth. "It gets worse," Moen said. Her voice shook as she turned the page. "It has no true shape of its own, because it is only hunger. But it is intelligent. It takes the shape of a man so it can move through the world of men. But the shape is wrong, a mockery. Its limbs are too long, because it imitates the stretched shadows of dusk. Its joints bend in ways they should not, because it has no understanding of bones. It moves without sound, because it is the silence between heartbeats. It is the fear that the thing you see at the edge of your vision is real." The description was sickeningly exact. A tall, thin figure. Limbs with too many joints. Jerky, unnatural motion. It matched exactly what Morwen had seen near the tree line. That evening, we sat together around the fireplace. The generator was running, its hum a weak defense against the crushing silence. Morwen read the passages aloud to the others, her voice trembling but steady enough. The effect was immediate and profound. Vark, who had mocked all of it before, sat frozen in place, his face gray. The cynical armor he hid behind had cracked apart, leaving only raw, primitive fear. This was not a grizzly bear. This was a nightmare with a name. It can't be real," Celine murmured. But there was no strength in her voice. She was a woman of science, of observable evidence, of diagnosis. But the legend fit the horrifying facts too perfectly. "Some kind of cryptid, then," she said. "A species that went dormant. a troglobite adapted to geothermal vents. Maybe the ash cloud changed the atmospheric pressure, triggered its emergence. She was trying to force it into a shape she could understand, trying to cover it with the safe, familiar language of biology. But the words from the old book lingered in the high-ceilinged room. Words about a hunger born before the sun. "It says it feeds on fear," Vark stammered, his eyes flicking toward the dark corners of the hall. "Is that what it's been doing?" His voice dropped. "Scratching inside the walls? Just playing with us?" The question stayed there, suspended in the air, more frightening than any answer. We were not only prey anymore. We were entertainment, a meal to be savored. Then, as if answering him, a sound came from the floor above. Not the dry, familiar scratching in the vents. This was a loud splintering crack, followed by a deep, resonant thud against the floorboards directly overhead. It was the sound of enormous, deliberate force. All of us went still, our heads tilted upward, listening. Another thud came, harder this time. Dust shook loose from the ceiling beams above the fire. It knew we had found its name. It knew we understood what it was. The time for hiding in shadows and whispering through walls was over. The hunt had begun in full. The heavy impacts from the floor above were a declaration of war. The creature, Zol, as we had begun to call it in hushed, frightened voices, had abandoned the pretense of stealth. It was no longer only a creeping dread at the edge of perception. It was physical now, aggressive, present, and it was testing the limits of our cage. "What the hell was that?" Vark hissed, stumbling to his feet and snatching up a fire poker. "Directly above the north guest wing," I said. My voice stayed low and controlled, trying to project a calm I did not feel. "Mordrin, stay with Morwen and Celine. Vark, you're with me." We moved through the darkened corridors, our heavy-duty flashlights carving sharp, nervous circles through the gloom. The generator had been shut down for the night, and beyond the reach of our beams, the lodge was a maze of absolute black. Every familiar painting of mountain scenery along the walls seemed to watch us pass with hostile eyes. The silence was complete. The thudding had stopped as abruptly as it had started. We found the room. The door, a heavy oak slab, was still closed and locked. But 3 deep vertical gouges had been carved into the wood, splintering it down to the core. They were perfectly parallel, just like the wounds on Naira. It looked as though an enormous 3-pronged rake had been driven into it with impossible force. "It didn't even try to break it down," Vark whispered. His bravado was gone. Only a childlike terror remained. It was just showing us it could. That was the beginning of its new game. For the next 48 hours, it tortured us. The soft scratching in the vents gave way to loud, violent assaults on the lodge itself. A sudden deafening blow against a boarded window in the east wing would send us rushing there with makeshift weapons raised. When we arrived, there would be nothing, only silence. Then minutes later, a terrible scraping, like metal claws dragged over stone, would echo from the main chimney and force us back to the great hall with our hearts hammering. It seemed to be everywhere at once, a phantom that struck and vanished, never allowing us to rest. It was showing us its speed, its strength, its reach. It was methodically mapping our defenses. More than that, it was mapping our reactions, learning how we moved, how we spoke to one another, how we feared. It was a master predator, and it was enjoying the chase. Sleep became a luxury we could no longer remember. We took shifts in pairs, huddled near the fire, listening to the siege. The strain carved deep lines into every face. Celine's clinical calm was beginning to come apart. She flinched at every sound. Vark's anger had soured into brittle, simmering panic. Mordrin stayed a stone of grim silence. But even his hands, I noticed, trembled slightly as he cleaned and oiled the small generator parts. On the 3rd night of the siege, I was on watch with Morwen. The fire had collapsed into a bed of glowing embers, giving off a weak, pulsing red light. The creature had been silent for hours. Somehow, that silence was worse than the noise. "Why do you think it stopped?" Morwen asked. Her voice was almost nothing. She was looking past the fireplace into the darkness beyond it, toward the huge unboarded panoramic windows on the 2nd floor mezzanine overlooking the main hall. "Maybe it's tired," I said. I did not believe it for even a moment. "The book said it doesn't get tired," she answered flatly. "It's hunger. Hunger doesn't tire." As she spoke, a sound outside caught my attention. A faint crunch in the ash. Not a bang. Not a scrape. A single, deliberate footstep. I took my flashlight and moved quietly to one of the narrow peepholes we had cut into the boarded main doors. I covered most of the flashlight lens with my hand, letting only a thin blade of light escape, and pressed my eye to the hole. Outside, the world was made entirely of gray. Ash fell softly, endlessly. For a moment, I saw nothing except the dead trees along the far edge of the parking lot. Then something moved. It stepped out from behind the dark outline of a buried snowcat. It was exactly what Morwen had described, but seeing it with my own eyes crushed the breath from my lungs. It was impossibly tall and waisted thin, its body made of stretched ligaments and pale, tight skin pulled over some alien frame of bone. At least 7 feet tall, maybe more. Its limbs were long and spidery, and it moved with a horrifying, unnatural smoothness, its joints seeming to bend at several impossible angles. It wore the vague, twisted imitation of a human shape. But it was no more human than a scarecrow. It came slowly toward the lodge, its bare elongated feet making no more sound than the falling ash. It stopped about 30 feet from the doors, directly in my line of sight. Then it raised its head. Slowly. Deliberately. My blood went cold. Its face was a smooth, pale, oval horror. No mouth. No nose. Only the suggestion of features, like a sculpture worn nearly blank by a million years of wind. And where its eyes should have been, there were only 2 dark, hollow pits. They were not empty sockets. They were deeper than that, like holes punched through into an endless, hungry blackness. Voids. And they were staring straight at the peephole. Straight at me. It knew I was there. It had known the whole time. This was not some random patrol. It had brought me here. It had wanted me to see it. I could not breathe. I could not move. My mind screamed at me to pull away, to run, but that vacant, devouring gaze held me pinned. There was no malice in those pits. No anger. No rage, like an animal might show. There was only cold, ancient patience. Hunger. A hunger that had waited for ages in the dark heart of the earth. And now that it was awake, it had all the time in the world. It lifted one long, 3-fingered hand. The fingers were like sharpened reeds of bone. It pointed, not at me, upward, toward the 2nd floor of the lodge, toward the rear of the building. Then, from that direction, came the sound of breaking glass. It had been a diversion. While I stood frozen, mesmerized by the thing at the gate, another one, or the same one moving with impossible speed, had broken into our fortress. The crash of glass from the back of the lodge snapped its hold on me. I stumbled away from the peephole, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "It's in," I shouted, my voice raw. 2nd floor. Back of the building. Panic exploded. Vark grabbed a heavy iron. Mordrin lifted the fire axe. We thundered up the grand staircase, our footsteps booming through the cavernous lodge. The creature outside was gone. Through the peephole, there was only empty, lifeless gray again. It had been a feint, a perfectly executed act of psychological warfare. We found the source of the noise in a small guest room at the end of a long corridor. The window had been smashed. Its frame was splintered. Cold, ash-filled air spun into the room, carrying the sulfur stink of the outside world. Broken glass covered the carpet like jagged ice. But the room was empty. There was no sign of the creature. Only a few long, deep scratches across the wallpaper. That was all. "It's gone," Celine said, her breath fogging in the cold air. "It broke in and just left." "It's playing with us," Mordrin growled. His knuckles were white around the axe handle. "Hurting us. Keeping us running." We boarded up the shattered window with frantic, clumsy movements. The safety of our fortress was a lie. It could enter whenever it chose. The walls were not there to keep it out. They were only the borders of our terrarium. The real, soul-crushing horror began later that night. We huddled together in the main hall, too terrified to split up. The fire was our only comfort, a fragile circle of light surrounded by an ocean of dark. No one spoke. We only listened. For hours, there was nothing but the crackle of burning logs and the mournful sigh of the wind. Then a new sound came. At first, it was faint, drifting from the corridor that led toward the guest wings. Someone was crying. Soft, heartbroken sobs echoed through the silent lodge. We all froze and looked at one another in terror. The sound was horribly familiar. "Help me," a small voice whispered from the darkness. A girl's voice. Naira's voice. "Oh God," Vark breathed. All the color drained from his face. The voice grew a little louder. A little closer. "It's so cold out here. Please let me in. I'm so cold." It was a perfect imitation. The exact rhythm of her speech. The slight tremble of fear we had all grown used to hearing in her voice. Flawless predatory mimicry. "Don't listen," I said, my voice a rough whisper. "It's not her. It's the creature." But Vark was already standing. His eyes were wide and unfocused. Since Naira's death, he had gone quiet, wound tight with guilt and remorse. He never spoke aloud. He was the one who had wanted that ski trip, the one who had convinced her to come. Now the creature was playing his guilt like a violin. "Naira," he called, his voice breaking. "Naira, is that you?" "Vark?" "No," Celine cried, reaching for him. But he was already moving. "Vark, stop," I shouted, grabbing his arm. "It's a trap. That isn't her." He jerked against my grip, his eyes wild. "But what if it is? What if we left her out there? We have to check." "It's not her," I snarled, tightening my hold. He was stronger than he looked, driven by a desperate, irrational hope. Mordrin stepped beside me, his heavy body blocking Vark's path to the corridor. "Please," the voice sobbed from the hall. It sounded as if it was just beyond the archway now. "I'm scared, Vark. Please help me. Let go of me." Vark shouted. He shoved me hard. Reason had completely left him. He saw a chance, however impossible, to undo the failure he believed was his. To save the girl he had not saved before. That was the creature's genius. It did not only hunt our bodies. It hunted our regrets. Mordrin and I struggled with him in the firelight, grunting through a clumsy, desperate fight. Vark fought with the strength of a madman, his eyes locked on the dark corridor where those pitiful cries were coming from. "You're killing her," he screamed at me, his face twisted with anguish. Then the voice changed. The soft, pleading sobs stretched and warped into something grotesque. The pitch dropped, bent, became a low, guttural chuckle. A wet, clicking sound, like stones grinding together at the bottom of a well. Naira's voice peeled away, revealing the alien horror underneath. The chuckling swelled into a full-throated, distorted laugh. A sound that scraped against the inside of our skulls. It was ancient malice, pure amusement. The laughter rolled through the hall for one long, horrifying moment. Then it stopped as abruptly as it had begun. Silence slammed back into place. Vark stopped struggling, all the strength drained from his body, and he dropped to his knees, shaking with dry, convulsive sobs. The cruelty of the trick had broken him. The monster had not only stolen a dead girl's voice, it had turned his hope and guilt into a weapon and used it against him. We helped him back to the fire. He was a broken man. That moment destroyed the last fragile unity our group had. Now we were not only afraid of the thing outside, or the thing inside the walls. We were afraid of our own minds, our own weaknesses. Vark stared into the darkness with empty, terrified eyes. Morwen barely spoke anymore, sinking deeper into herself and into the pages of her book. Celine's attempts to explain everything rationally became more frantic and less convincing, even to her. We were trapped inside a box with a predator that knew our names, our faces, the private griefs we carried in our hearts. It was not simply trying to kill us. It was taking us apart piece by piece, savoring the fear as it stripped us down to the bone. The mimicry broke us. We spent the next day in a numb, shell-shocked haze, flinching at every shadow, starting at every sound. Vark became a ghost by the fire, wrapped in a blanket, staring into the flames with dead eyes. The creature stayed silent, as though satisfied to let the poison of its attack work through us. It was a new kind of terror, the quiet after the storm, when all you can do is wait for the next inevitable strike. Celine was the one who pulled us back from the edge. While the rest of us sat frozen in fear, her analytical mind, her need for a problem that could be solved, had fixed itself on the only thin piece of hope we had. Morwen's book. She had taken it from Morwen, who was too lost in fear to object, and spent hours poring over the text, cross-referencing passages, writing notes on a bar napkin. Late that afternoon, she called us together. "Listen," she said. Her voice was sharp and focused, cutting clean through the fog of dread. "We've been so focused on what the creature is that we missed the most important part." She pointed to a passage in the Zul chapter, one we had skimmed over in our first horror. The old elder speaks. It is of the time before the sun. The gray world is its home. It is strong in the long dark, in the cold, in shadow, but it fears the true fire, not the heat of the living which it craves, but the bright flame, the memory of the sun. The old one said that when the first dawn broke over the mountains, Zul shrieked and fled back into the deep places of the earth, because the light was a pain it could not endure. It sleeps in darkness, and it hunts in darkness. Light, Celine said. Her eyes burned with an intensity one had not seen since the world ended. It fears bright light. Fire. It may not just be superstition. There's probably a biological reason. She leaned closer. A creature that evolved in subterranean geothermal vents would have no natural protection against intense full-spectrum light. Its photoreceptors, if it has any, would be overwhelmed. For us, it would be like staring straight into the sun. The fire in the hearth, I said, realizing it aloud. That's what keeps it from entering the main hall. It's never come straight in here. It only attacks the edges. Exactly, Celine said. But a fireplace isn't enough. That's defensive. We need to go on the offensive. Her voice hardened. We need something blinding. Something overwhelming. We need to fight fire with fire. A spark returned to the room. Agency. Purpose. The thought of fighting back, of having any weapon at all against this impossible horror, cut through our terror like an antidote. The fuel, Mordrin said. It was the first time he had spoken in hours. His voice came low and rough. For the snowcats and the plows. There's a maintenance shed out back. Should be a couple of 55-gallon drums of diesel in there. My mind began to race. Old Ranger survival instincts pushed the fear aside. Diesel is good, I said. Stable. But we need a way to project it. Something that can make a huge, sudden flare. The plan began to take shape. A desperate, half-insane gamble born from old folklore and modern mechanics. We would lure the creature into the grand lobby. Our kill box. It was the largest open space in the lodge, filled with flammable furniture. We had turned the entire room into a funeral pyre. I can build it, Mordrin said. A trace of his old self flickered back into him. He stood and began pacing, drawing ideas in the air with his grease-stained hands. The kitchen has a high-pressure sprayer for cleaning floors. I can repurpose the pump, hook it to a fuel line. He nodded to himself. We'll need a nozzle, something to turn the fuel into mist, and an ignition source. The bar, Vark said suddenly. His voice was rough. He had been listening, and a small spark of life had returned to his eyes. The chance to act. The chance for revenge. It was dragging him out of his stupor. It's full of high-proof liquor. Whiskey. Vodka. We can make Molotov cocktails for a pilot light and secondary ignition points. The work gave us focus. Fear was still there, a cold stone lodged deep in my stomach. But now it was covered by grim purpose. We had a plan. A suicidal long shot. But still a plan. Mordrin became a man possessed. He vanished between the basement and the kitchen, and the lodge filled with the sound of clanging metal and his muttered curses. Hours later, he returned holding a monstrous contraption. A portable pump connected by a thick hose to a 5-gallon canister. The hose ended in a long metal wand with a flared nozzle. A makeshift flamethrower. The igniter, he said with a grim smile. While Mordrin worked, Celine, Morwen, and even Vark formed an assembly line of destruction in the lodge's luxurious bar. They emptied bottle after bottle of expensive scotch and bourbon, filling them with alcohol and strips of torn linen from the laundry room. They worked without speaking. Only the clink of glass broke the silence. They were making munitions for a war against a demon. I spent my time preparing the battlefield. I dragged the heaviest, driest furniture into the center of the great hall. Velvet settees, polished oak tables, heavy drapes torn from the windows. I built them into a huge combustible mound directly in front of the fireplace. I planned the retreat lines, the safest places to stand once the inferno started. By nightfall, everything was ready. The main hall had become a tinderbox, waiting for flame. Mordrin's flamethrower rested beside the hearth, its canister filled with diesel siphoned from the generator. A crate of Molotov cocktails stood nearby. The air was heavy with fuel and alcohol, a volatile perfume made of desperation. We had our weapon, forged from the forgotten stories of a dead world and the mechanical refuse it had left behind. Now we only had to invite the monster to its own cremation and survive the fire. The plan was simple in theory, terrifying in practice. We needed more fuel. The 5 gallons in Mordrin's device would make a massive burst of flame, but it would not be enough. We needed diesel to soak the lobby, enough to create an inferno the creature could not simply walk through. That fuel was in the maintenance shed, 100 yards from the main building, across an open plaza buried in ash. 100 yards of perfect, exposed hunting ground. It has to be 2 of us, I said, looking at the small group gathered in the dim firelight. 1 to pump the fuel, 1 to stand watch. It'll be faster that way. I'm going, Mordrin said at once. His voice was flat, final. I know the shed. I know how the pump works. It's my job. I nodded. I'll go with you. No, Vark said. His voice was surprisingly steady. He stood, pale-faced but resolved. You're the best fighter we have. You need to stay here and coordinate the final defense. He drew a breath. I'll go. I owe it. He did not say Naira's name. He did not need to. This was his penance. I looked at him then, really looked at him for the first time in days. The arrogant city man was gone. What remained was someone hollowed out by grief and terror, but with a hard, newly found resolve in his eyes. He was not doing it out of bravado. He was doing it because he had to. All right, Vark, I said, giving him a slow nod. Watch Mordrin's back. Your only job is to scan the darkness. I held his gaze. If you see anything, if you feel anything, you yell, and both of you run back here. Forget the fuel. Understood? Understood, he said. The second part of the plan was the diversion. While you're out there, we need to pull its attention to the opposite side of the lodge, I explained. It's smart. It'll notice 2 people leaving the building. Morwen, who had been quiet until then, spoke up. The ballroom, she said. Her voice was soft but steady. In the east wing, there's a sound system, a record player. If we turn it all the way up, it's the loudest thing in the building besides the generator. It was a good idea. A sudden explosion of sound from the far side of the lodge might draw the creature away for the few precious minutes Mordrin and Vark would need. Okay, I said, keeping my voice as even as I could. Celine, you're with me. We'll set the main trap here. I looked at Morwen. Morwen, you'll watch from the second-floor library window. It has the best view of the plaza. Give the signal when the plaza is clear. Then get to the ballroom and start the music. Be ready to run. The next hour became a symphony of tense preparation. Mordrin and Vark collected empty 5-gallon water jugs from the kitchen, along with a hand siphon pump. They dressed in their warmest gear, their faces grim. Celine and I arranged the flammable furniture in the lobby, making channels to guide the fire. Morwen took her position upstairs. We used handheld radios we had found in the ski patrol office. After 10 agonizing minutes, Morwen's voice crackled through the static. The plaza is clear, Davin. I don't see anything. Not for the last 10 minutes. Copy that, Morwen, I whispered into the radio. Begin the diversion. Then I turned to Mordrin and Vark. You go on my signal. I gave Morwen 30 seconds. Then a small, faint sound began to echo from the east wing. It quickly grew louder, swelling into a blast of chaotic noise. An old big band swing record. Its cheerful brass notes warped by the lodge's cavernous acoustics into a manic, horrifying cacophony. It sounded like a ghost party at the end of the world. Now, I said to Mordrin and Vark. Go. They slipped through a side door into the vast twilight, moving low in a crouch. From the peephole, I watched them vanish into the falling ash. 2 small dark figures, swallowed by a huge and hostile landscape. Upstairs, Morwen's voice came over the radio again, tight with fear. Davin, the music. It's working. I hear something in the corridor outside the ballroom. A heavy dragging sound. It's going toward the music. Good. Morwen, get back to the main hall. Now. Do not engage. Just get back here, I ordered. My eyes stayed locked on the peephole. Seconds stretched into minutes. The swing music blared on, a frantic looping rhythm that grated against my nerves. Where were they? It should not have been taking this long. Then I saw them. 2 figures emerged from the gray curtain of ash, moving fast. They had the jugs with them, and the jugs looked heavy. They were halfway across the plaza when Mordrin suddenly stumbled. One of the jugs slipped from his grip. Vark turned back to help him. And in that brief hesitation I saw it. At the edge of the woods, a shape pulled itself free from the shadows. Zul. It had ignored the diversion. Or there was more than one. It unfolded to its full, terrifying height, its long limbs extending. It did not run. It simply flowed across the ash-covered ground, a river of silent, starving darkness. It moved with impossible speed, closing the distance in seconds. "It's coming!" I screamed into the radio, my voice breaking. "Behind you! Run!" Out on the plaza, Vark and Mordrin looked up. Their faces became masks of pure horror. They dropped the cans and scrambled toward the lodge. The creature was almost on them, its long, three-fingered hands reaching out. They were not going to reach the door. Time stretched strangely, bending out of shape. As the creature rushed toward Mordrin and Vark, all pale limbs and starving shadow, I saw Vark do something I never would have imagined. He shoved Mordrin forward with all his strength, sending the old man stumbling toward the entrance. Then Vark turned back. He held a metal fire poker in both hands. I had not even realized he had taken it. And he faced the monster. It was useless. Insane. A final act of desperate defiance from a man who had been ruled by fear. Zul did not slow. With a contemptuous flick of one long arm, it knocked the poker aside. The metal vanished into the ash. Then it fell on Vark. For one split second, he disappeared inside a knot of limbs bending at sickening, impossible angles. I heard one choked cry. Then it was cut off. Driven forward by Vark's sacrifice, Mordrin crashed through the side door and slammed it shut behind him. He collapsed against the wall, dragging air into his lungs. His face was twisted with terror and disbelief. He saved me," Mordrin wheezed. "The kid. He saved me." There was no time to grieve. Morwen and Celine pulled Mordrin away from the door, just as a thunderous blow shook the entire frame. The creature was outside, hammering against the wood. "The fuel!" I shouted. "Did you get it?" Mordrin nodded and pointed with a trembling finger at the 2 5-gallon jugs he had managed to carry back. "That's all we got. 10 gallons. It would have to be enough." "Barricade that door," I ordered Celine and Morwen. Mordrin with me. Now. We worked with the frantic precision of people already marked for death. While Celine and Morwen shoved a heavy oak sideboard against the door, Mordrin and I unscrewed the caps from the fuel jugs. Then the pounding stopped. A terrible silence dropped over us, more threatening than the attack itself. It was listening, waiting. "It's going to find another way in," Mordrin said grimly. "It knows the building now." "Let it," I said. My voice was cold. I began throwing diesel over the pile of furniture in the center of the hall, across the expensive carpets, up the heavy drapes. The sharp, pungent smell filled the air. We were making a killing ground. This is where we end it. We emptied both cans. Dark fuel soaked deep into wood and fabric. Mordrin took his place near the grand staircase with the flamethrower, where he had a clear line of fire and still had a way to retreat. Celine and Morwen crouched behind the massive stone support of the fireplace, a crate of Molotov cocktails between them. I stood near the main entrance with one prepared bottle in my hand, the flint of my lighter cold and strange beneath my thumb. "Kill the lights," I whispered. The switch was beside me. I flipped it. The generator still hummed down in the basement, but our kill box fell into almost complete darkness. Only the faint red glow of the fireplace embers remained. We waited. The silence felt alive. It pressed in around us, broken only by our ragged breathing. Every sense in me was burning. Every creak of the old lodge, every soft crunch of ash outside, sounded like death approaching. It came from the mezzanine. We heard the delicate tinkle of broken glass from the second-floor lounge, the same one near where Naira had been found. Then came a slow, heavy scrape. A dark, stretched shape appeared against the faint gray light of the shattered window upstairs, a silhouette made of impossible angles and profound wrongness. It poured over the mezzanine railing like smoke and landed on the floor of the main hall without a sound. In the deep shadow, it was only a shifting patch of absolute black. It paused. I could feel its alien senses searching the darkness, tasting the air, smelling the fuel, the fear, the life. Then it began moving slowly, deliberately, toward the center of the room, toward the pile of fuel-soaked furniture. It was curious, confident. It had no understanding of a trap. It reached the edge of the soaked carpet. In the ember light, I could see it more clearly now. The pale, tight skin, the long limbs with too many joints, the hideous blank face with two bottomless pits where eyes should have been. It lowered its head, as if smelling the offering we had left for it. Now I breathed. I struck the lighter. The tiny flame appeared in the dark like a defiant star. I lit the rag in the bottle and threw it in a high arc. It sailed through the air and smashed into the center of the pyre. The world exploded into light and heat. The fuel ignited with a concussive whomp, and a wave of searing air rolled over us. A column of flame roared 30 feet high, turning the cavernous hall for one moment into a vision of hell. And inside the heart of that fire, the creature was revealed. It shrieked. It was not a cry of pain. It was cosmic outrage. Pure, unfiltered hatred from something that had never known true light. The force of it shook the walls of the lodge. For one blinding instant, the flames burned away the illusion, the borrowed human shape, and we saw what it truly was. A chaotic, writhing mass of what looked like charred sinew and blackened bone. A nightmare not of limbs that spasmed and tore at itself. The fire clung to it, though it did not seem to burn it in any normal way. It agitated it, tortured it, forced it into an agonizing frenzy. "Mordrin!" I screamed over the roar. Mordrin raised the wand of the flamethrower and squeezed the trigger. A stream of liquid fire blasted across the room, swallowing the shrieking thing. The monster thrashed, a storm of shadow and flame. Then it charged. It moved with unholy speed, a living inferno rushing straight at Mordrin. Mordrin held his ground, blasting it with fire. But the thing could not be stopped. It crashed into him. For one horrible second, the two figures became one. The old mechanic and the ancient demon burned together in the same cleansing fire. Then they fell into the center of the burning pyre. The shrieking stopped. Only the fire remained, roaring as it consumed our sanctuary. The fire burned with a furious, hungry life. It devoured the pyre we had built, then climbed greedily up the heavy drapes and licked at the massive timber beams of the vaulted ceiling. The heat struck like a physical blow, driving us back. Our faces burned. Our eyes streamed from the thick, acrid smoke filling the great hall. There was no sign of the creature, no sign of Mordrin. They had been consumed together, erased by the inferno we had set loose. We retreated, coughing and stumbling through the service corridors, then out through a kitchen exit into the gray, frozen air. We huddled near the corner of the building and watched thick black smoke pour from the shattered windows of the main hall. A funeral pyre for our friend, and for our fortress. We had won. The thought felt empty, tasteless. The cost had been too high. Celine had managed to grab her medical bag, though there was no one left for her to save. Vark had bought us the seconds we needed. Vark and Mordrin. Our victory had been built on their bodies. The fire raged for hours. We watched the heart of Black Hollow Lodge burn. At last, the roof of the great hall groaned and collapsed inward in a shower of sparks that briefly lit the ash-filled sky. Then, slowly, as the fuel ran out, the flames began to weaken. By the time the gray twilight started to feel like morning, the fire had burned itself down. Where the grand lobby had stood, only a smoldering black skeleton remained. Silence returned. A deep, ringing silence, even deeper than before. The constant hum of the generator in the basement had finally died, its fuel lines likely severed by the fire. The lodge was truly dead. The three of us stood at a distance, staring at the ruin. Me, Celine, Morwen. We were exhausted, battered, covered in soot and grime. We had faced the monster and survived. But the relief I had expected never came. There was only a vast, hollow weariness. "Is it over?" Morwen whispered. Her voice was rough from the smoke. "The one in the lodge is gone," I said. The words felt heavy, useless. "It's over for now." We spent the day salvaging whatever we could from the less damaged wings of the building. Untouched food, blankets, bottled water. We moved our small camp to the ski rental shop, a smaller separate building that was cold and bare, but still structurally sound. The adrenaline had faded, leaving the cold, hard truth of our situation behind. We had defeated Zul. We had proved the ancient nightmare could be wounded, could be killed. But as I stood in the doorway of our cramped new shelter, looking out at the unchanged, desolate world, a chilling thought took root in my mind. We had not fought the monster. We had fought a monster. The legend had never spoken of a single being. It had spoken of a kind of spirit, a hunger born from ash and darkness. The one that had tormented us, studied our fears, and mimicked our dead was gone, burned to nothing in its own hunting ground. But the world that had given birth to it was still here. The sun remained only a pale smear behind a permanent gray veil. The ash kept falling, a soft, endless whisper, burying the world deeper every day. This was its world now. We were the intruders. As the starless dusk thickened into what we called night, I walked to the edge of the ruined plaza. My boots crunched through the fresh layer of ash already covering the scorch marks from our battle. I looked up toward Crow's Spine, its jagged summit lost inside the swirling gray clouds. My eyes searched the mountain's base. The black cliffs, the stands of dead, skeletal pine. Then I saw it, far away, maybe half a mile down the slope, near the base of a rock face. A thin, almost invisible plume of steam rising from the mouth of a deep, dark cave. It coiled into the cold air, a slow, steady exhalation. It looked as if the world itself were breathing, as if something ancient, vast, and alive was still stirring in the warm, deep heart of the mountain. We had won the battle. We had burned down our prison and killed our jailer. But we were still trapped in the wilderness. And out there, in the cold and the endless gray twilight, the ancient hunger was not dead. It was only sleeping, and it had brothers,